to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen. With me today is a longtime listener who has learned to trust her abundance, Janine B. This is your Daily Dose of Happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. Bridget will be back with us next week. We'll be missing her this week, of course, but she's away for a good reason because she's celebrating her wedding anniversary. So it's an exciting day for Bridge, but Janine and I will carry on. And Janine, we have a guest anyway today, so it's not like we're down to two. We've got three as usual, right?
Super cool, Becca. Yeah.
But today we got Becca Ribbing join us. And Becca, I have to admit, when you first reached out to be on the show, I didn't really know much about you. But like Janine was talking about before we got going, we've been reading up and you got some cool stuff going on. Very
Thanks.
Cool stuff. So give us like a little background. How did all this get started?
Oh, so I became a coach. I was really young. And when I became a coach, also coaching was kind of in its infancy. So basically what happened was I was doing that thing you do in your mid-20s where you're like, I went to college. Now I'm in the real world. I thought I knew everything. Evidently, I don't know anything.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Been there. Yeah, kind of still there. No,
right.
It's a cycle. It's a life cycle. So I was really going back and forth about what I wanted to do next. Like what I had thought was going to be my dream really wasn't. And so in the process of me getting really clear on what I wanted to do, I was doing all the reading, doing all the personal development, self-help book, circuit. And I started helping all my friends. Like all my friends were at the same age, at that same space, and they were trying to figure out what they were going to do. They were trying to figure out not just what to do, but also how to make that leap and prove to people that they were worth taking a chance on.
Yes.
And so as I started helping them, I was like, oh, this is great. I love doing this. And I started really helping them. And is right when coaching started becoming more and more popular. So I was like, I'm going to become a coach. And it's been really great. I love coaching. But I also have a drive for writing. I love to articulate all of these thoughts through writing. I actually, for a long time, ran a website called Thank the Now. And that was a mindfulness, like a beginner's mindfulness meditation website where I had 90 authors writing for me.
Whoa.
And
wow.
It was a labor of love. And I, again, thought I knew everything.
You didn't learn the first time, huh? Okay.
We never learn, as you said. Like we always, our brain tells us we know things where we don't. And then I had my second kid who had a lot of health issues when he was a little baby. He's wonderful and delightful, but it was just not the right time to be running something so big. And I let that go and just continued to focus on the coaching and got through that stage. And now I'm back to writing books and I don't think I will ever create another website where I'm managing that many people. But
so are you
enough?
Are you wanting to transition out of coaching into writing? That's kind of the sense of, is that wrong?
Yeah, I love coaching and it gives me really good information for what I want to work on writing about. So I am kind of in my own little transition space, but I don't imagine I'll ever actually give up coaching because, it's life and things change so fast nowadays that like if you're not actually in the thick of it, then you lose touch, right? I mean, businesses do this all the time. You see business after business, like they make strategic decisions where it's like, well, I want it to be still 1999 or I want it to be 2006. And it's just the world's almost changing too fast to allow myself to take that much of a step back. But so this is my first book. I'm in the middle of writing my second book.
Very good. So tell us about the first book.
Yes, please.
So the first book is called The Clarity Journal, and it is basically the book that I wrote for myself when I was in the middle of that struggle after my son got over his health issues and I was trying to get back to myself because we do this, something happens that gets us off track And it's really hard to go backwards and recognize what you've let go in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes we'll let more and more of ourselves go and we won't reevaluate. And so as we're trying to get clarity, I think that being able to ask like a lot of questions, like the broad questions to help you both find your strengths and who you really are, find your values, as well as really be able to dream and expand upon what the future looks like. I think that when we're talking about clarity, a lot of times people are like, oh, I really want clarity about what I'm going to do. And in the back of their mind, they're thinking about like the rest of their life. Like, I want to know what I'm going to do. Like it's an end goal.
Yeah, it's always the future, right?
It's the future, but it's like all of the future.
Mm-hmm.
And
all at once, right? One great big package. Here we are.
Right. I'm going to figure this out and I'm never going to change.
Right.
And that's not realistic because we're always growing and changing. That's like the core of who we are is like being able to grow and change and develop. And so I kind of wrote the Clarity Journal to help people really move through that process a little bit less black and white, a little less like, okay, I need to have a massively brilliant right answer and I'm going to just do this until I'm 70 and then I'm going to retire and live in the Bahamas or Florida or wherever. And this is really like kind of helping you figure out what the next 3 to 5 years looks like. Like, what is it that you are missing right now? And what do you need to like help yourself move back into a better space for you to move forward?
And presumably this was drawn out of your experience with your second child. I mean, because
it was actually, I was in the middle of trying to figure it out for myself. Like, it felt like something was missing. And that's always how it starts. It feels like something is missing.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it feels like something is missing, you start talking about it with your friends, like kind of noodling on it. I'm not sure what to do. And my friend stopped me and she was like, okay, Becca, you're a coach. What would you tell yourself?
Physician, heal thyself.
Physician, heal thyself. And I laughed and I internally was very mad at her because we don't want to have to ask ourselves these questions. And so I went after we hung out and I hung up pretty quickly. I went and I just wrote down prompt after prompt that I asked my clients. And as I was just looking at those prompts and starting to write them out from my own perspective, I just started to realize how coaching is wonderful, but you don't actually need coaching if you're not that stuck. Like if you can be relatively self-aware, just having those questions can really start helping you gain more momentum and energy. And the thing I like about it is if you're writing it all down, then when you find your momentum ebbs and flows, you have your why already written out and it helps bring it back. Like I know that everyone listening to this podcast has had some pretty major ebbs and flows over the last 1.5 years or 2 years. And that's just, I mean, it's been an especially challenging time for a lot of people in a lot of ways, but we always have those curveballs thrown at us. And the more that we can really know truly in ourselves what our strengths are, what our purpose is, the more that if you get knocked off for a couple months because of an illness or because life happened, the easier it is to get back to that center.
Well, plus you also mentioned writing as being and that's been a big part of your life in general, but writing in particular has therapeutic value, but it also has internal connection value. So you were essentially doing something that you already loved, which made it really easy, I'm sure, that enabled you to get the stuff out, to get to that clarity place because you were writing it. The writing actually helps create the clarity.
Right. Well, and it also adds a layer of commitment that just saying it out loud doesn't always. Sometimes saying it out loud can be extremely powerful.
Sure.
But sometimes when you say it out loud, you're still hesitating and you sometimes naturally hold yourself back. And hopefully if you're writing it out, you're able to see where you're holding yourself back and push through a little bit stronger.
And even if you can't see it, just the act of writing it is going to bring some clarity on its own at some point along the way, just because you're writing, you're expressing.
I'm taking notes, by the way, speaking of writing.
I love
because
it.
this is really will help me with my journaling. So thank you.
I love that.
I like the clarity because I'm often, when I do like lots of low thought activity, I will often put these, these thoughts out there and I discuss this stuff with myself, but I have a harder time writing it down. But I like that commitment statement that you made because that's really, really powerful.
Yeah.
Because words are just lost when we say them, but the intention seems to be more there if we can write it down. So I got to write it down.
Well, plus journaling
or summarize. I mean,
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be the whole thing. If you have like inspiration, just write down the inspiration. You don't have to necessarily go through the whole process in writing. But I mean, I think it's, a lot of people talk about affirmations and writing out affirmations. I mean, there's just a whole lot of different ways in which when you write, you could be committing to yourself. Doesn't necessarily mean you are, but we all know people who aren't. But it's
not to be judging, by the way.
I'm not judging. I really wherever people are is really where they're at. And I think a lot of times when we talk about any of this like personal development journey, it can become like, who's more spiritual, who's, more in touch and in tune. Oh gosh. Well, my dad's probably never going to listen to this podcast. So like my dad, once had a girl.
We set up these stories on the show. It's amazing.
My dad had a girlfriend who used to every once in a while, tell me about a relationship problem, like an argument they were having. And then she'd be like, and he needs to go talk to God because God told me this is the right answer. And it's like, okay.
Sure. Why not?
Yeah. So I am very much not in the business of telling people where they are on their path. I am, what I really love doing is helping people find their strengths. When I get a new client, I'll start hearing their stories. And as I get, just a couple sessions in, I will start pointing out strengths I am hearing from them. And I'll always say, I've heard this. Like, are you really valuing this strength you have? And they almost always pause and look at me and they're just like, kinda, yeah, that comes easy to me. But the problem is they don't view it as a strength because it came easy.
Yeah.
And we've been so trained from our childhood on that what we're really supposed to focus on is our weaknesses. Like when you are in school, how often you're like, oh, it's great you got an A in math, but you really need to work on your writing.
Yeah, of course.
Or,
the goalposts always got set further back.
I was talking to a woman who has a very successful podcast, and she laughed when I told her that story because she's like, yeah, what they told me all the time in class was I needed to stop talking so much. And it's really hard. I have two kids, so I'm seeing this with them too. It's really hard to not do that compliment sandwich. We learn if we're giving feedback on someone's writing or if we're giving managerial feedback to do the compliment sandwich where you a positive thing, a negative thing, and then another positive thing. And that we start doing it with ourselves. And then it feels like, oh, if I'm not working really hard, then it's not valuable. But really there's something wrong. And the things that are the most valuable about you are the things that come easily to you, the things that energize you. That is what is going to speak to your boss or your clients or wherever you are on the entrepreneur versus job spectrum. The things that come easy to you are the things that people want to pay you for because they come easy to you. It's not going to take you very long and you get it and they don't have to train it.
Right. And that is very true. Well, I know it's always hard to generalize, but I'm going to ask a generalized question. Who's your typical client? The one that is the most common kind of client that comes to you?
Walt. Good question.
My most typical client is someone who really wants to make a shift and hasn't been able to give themselves permission to make that jump. And so much so that they really haven't articulated the jump they want to make that concretely. They're usually someone who wants to go from point A to point B all the way over somewhere else. And they need to know they're not crazy. Like, they need to know that they've really thought it through and that they've planned it out in a way that they're not going to regret later on. And I think that that's really natural. And I think that's one of the reasons why we end up talking to our friends. But the problem is that we talk to our friends and our family about a big jump that we want to make. And if your friends and family aren't in that space, a lot of times they're negative. They want you to be safe. Like, they don't feel like they can give you permission to do it because then you blame them. And
which is really weird, but that's understandable.
But it's understandable. And I mean, I even sometimes catch myself doing it, you know, with my friends. People.
That's why I don't even, I'll have this idea and I used to just, you know, call up my friend and tell her right away. And it's like, no, you know, I think I'm going to sit on it for a while because I don't want to hear someone's knee-jerk negative or I really don't want to hear their opinions. You know, I mean, until I'm ready, right? Until I'm like, okay. And then I'm ready to have something bounce off of someone else. But it's like my thing and I don't want to be tried to talk out of, if that makes sense.
It does.
Well, it totally makes sense. And a lot of times where people are really stuck is that they just, because they're afraid of it, they kind of explored around the edges, but they don't really dive into figuring out what it is they need to do, what if they need training. Like, they never take the first steps.
And
it's
like
almost,
we're afraid of our own ideas, really.
Right. Well, and it's like, it's precious. Like, we want to like hold it and maybe like think about it and pet it. But as soon as we actually start doing it, inevitably we're going to run into starting friction. Like, you're trying to do something completely new. It's not going to be easy. Like, I know, like, the more positive you are, the better it'll go. But anytime you're learning something new, you are actually creating new synapses in your brain.
You certainly are.
You're going to run into times you want to quit, you know?
Sure.
And so I think that I really help people figure out, is this a reasonable thing? What does the process look like? Where are we? Where do you really want to end up? Because that's also the other thing. Like, you know, is this the right thing? Well, it's certainly the right thing for right now, but where is this leading in 3 to 5 years? Where is this leading in 20 years? Because this thing, what are your steps here? What is the path you want to be on? What does it look like if you decide it is bad and you want to go back? Like, how do you keep some of your options open? And there's a lot that goes into making those big leaps. And I think that the more support you can have, the better you'll be able to manage it. And it's really hard. I'm very blessed. Like, I have the friend who is like, Becca, you're a coach. What would you tell yourself? You know, that like the being able to like say the hard questions, but most of us don't have family and friends that are like that. And most of us really just want so much to feel like we are doing the right thing.
Well, we don't really have confidence in our new idea because it's new. We haven't played with it enough. We haven't had any direct experience or very little direct experience with how it's going to play out yet. And so it's like when anything else is learned, we learn it slowly over time. We absorb it and become confident with it in stages. So yeah, of course, very early, you're not going to feel any confidence at all. And it's going to be pretty easy to talk you out of it. That's where a coach is very valuable. If the idea is worthy, by all means, you need to kind of drill it in.
Right.
Yeah, that's really big stuff. So that's cool. I like the way your career path is progressing.
Thank you.
I'm curious to know. I mean, you were talking earlier about the I can't remember what you called it, but basically you had this group of people who are focusing on now, teaching people how to stay in the now. I'm curious how that is either currently or in the future molding into what you're talking about.
That was the website I ran in the past.
Mm-hmm.
I do really bring a lot of mindfulness into my everyday work, because I really believe that when we talk about mindfulness, when we talk about meditation in the US or in Western societies, a lot of times we're so focused on the end goal that we miss the biggest step of all. And so when we are learning to meditate, the end goal of meditation is to be able to let go of all of our thoughts, right? And so that is how you get your gold star. However, mindfulness and meditation, what you're supposed to be doing is noticing everything that's going on, being able to actually non-judgmentally see it and then let it pass, not necessarily willpower it to be gone, but just the idea of non-judgmentally seeing it allows it to lessen. And I think that, this just goes into our self-talk and like our belief systems, because when you're trying to be positive, when you're trying to do something new, when you're trying to do any of this stuff, there's going to be this chatter. And there's going to be the naysayer. There's going to be a lot of different types of chatter. So there'll be the naysayer. There'll be the, you're not good enough. There's also going to be the, you're not pushing yourself hard enough. You're not like, there's a lot of different voices, and being able to hear those voices and not judge them, not jump in and feel like you have to fix them. When I was taking a very basic first aid class, I love hiking. And so I was doing a hike leader class where they taught us kind of the basics of how not to kill people on hikes.
That's a good skill. I like that
it's
one.
It's a good skill. And I mean, it also seems kind of basic, but like you just walk.
Hence the basic class.
Right. It's the basic class. So one of the things, they brought in a woman who was a EMT, and she also did like search and rescue in the mountains and stuff. And the first thing she taught us was, when you are going into an emergency situation, you need to stop and evaluate everything that's going on. Because you might think it's one thing and then find out the person on the ground was mauled by a bear and you're running right into the path. Or she had a couple different scenarios. Or if like if you're in an urban environment, maybe the person on the ground was electrocuted, like there was an electrified panel under them, and you've just stepped on it too, and now you're not saving them either.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of when we're trying to make decisions in life, we need to be able to do that as well. Like be able to stop, recognize any of the negative self-talk, any of the doubt, and be able to like stop and really notice it, like not judge it. Like really like be able to look at it like a third party would, like, oh, okay. So that belief came from my mom and I don't really need to hold on to it. It's not serving me. And the more that you can take that pause, take that beat and notice it non-judgmentally and then move forward.
Among other things, what you're really doing is slowing the scene down.
You're slowing the scene down.
You're slowing time down.
Yeah. Well, we all feel like we have to react right away. Do it.
Yeah, this reminds me of one night, I don't know, a couple of years ago, the fire alarm went off and just in the middle of the night, and me, I'm always been like, don't think, just act. And so here I am running down the hallway, and my husband said I look like a ghost because I have this big white robe on. And I'm running full hilt just around the house trying to find where the emergency is. And there wasn't one, but he's like, you got to stop and assess the situation before you rush in. Because I mean, I've come upon people trying to steal my bike, and the first thing I do is just run towards them like a screaming hyena, and I just like, go
Well,
and
that might
move
actually
forward.
work in certain circumstances.
That
But
might
you
Well,
just
it
don't
work
want
worked
to tell them.
then, but and I knew who it was, and they knew who I was, and so after that, I watched them. But it was just like slow down, take a breath, see where you're at. Don't jump in, because there is a certain thought, feeling, thinking that has to go on before we jump, and sometimes I have a tendency to just jump, so I have to slow down.
I think we're trained to jump. I mean,
We are.
even when I'm dealing with my kids, like I say something, we don't have time. You're going to be late for school. Just do it. Like, I think that we, for better and for worse, are very much in our society trained to jump, to run to action. And then when we can't, when we get stuck because we're not clear enough, or when we get stuck because we're in resistance to something, we so focus on needing to take action that we don't really evaluate why it is that action has been so hard for us to take.
Well, plus we live in the times of demanding instant gratification. When you're in an instant gratification society, you're looking for everything to happen quick. Everything's come on, let's go right here. And when it doesn't happen, that's when we freak out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, how many times, it's so funny. Like, I go to the doctor and it's like, what do you mean I need to wait for 48 hours to get my test result? Like,
48 hours? Who's got that kind of time?
Why can't you just give this to me right now? Like, what? Yeah. There's so many things like that, though. We are not a patient people anymore.
But that's all the more reason to be mindful, to take that time to focus on them now, because it's actually a cool skill. It ties in beautifully with what Janine and I are working on in the Taya boot camp. Because there's a lot of journaling, for one thing, tying into what you're talking about. And there's also meditation.
Still working on that part.
You're still working on that part? Yeah.
Journaling.
I've now convinced you need to actually do it.
No, I know. I let myself off the hook, and I journal when I'm really inspired, because if I don't, it's just like trying to get a ungreased wheel to move. And it wastes time to try to do something you just don't even, you're not feeling connected to. So when I feel connected to it, oh boy, can I write. I can just write. But when I'm not, I suppose it's a good thing that I'm making my living as a writer, because I be like month 2 not being able to write. But no, it's okay.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, sometimes when I'm trying to noodle on a journaling prompt, I don't know about this class, but I'm assuming you're getting prompts. Like, reading the prompt and going and taking a walk, sometimes that really helps. Like, and even if you don't end up thinking about it, like something else, every time I walk, I have a new idea.
It's that low thought activity. It's that getting ourselves involved in something that really takes our mind out of the situation that we're in, and we can better focus. Yeah, that helps too, for sure. Low thought activity is just one of my favorites.
Yeah.
I drive a lot and work in the car a lot.
Lots of voice memos to yourself.
Yeah. Oh, I do. Oh my gosh, I started doing that. Walt, I mean, I took it from you too, when you were saying that you were having a hard time writing. And then I just started to hey Siri, take a note. And not right now, Siri. Sorry, my phone just came on. And it works. It really works.
It does.
Voice memos work. Dudes, there are so many different ways of journaling. There's just so many different ways of journaling. So embrace
one of my
the
new favorite
works.
things is Otter, because you can do a voice note and it will transcribe it and put in the punctuation and everything.
Really? I'm writing this down. This is an app, or?
Yeah, it's an app and it's a website. So I think it's called otter.ai. I think is the URL.
Otter's been around for a few years, and their technology has really grown. They've really improved it.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to look this up.
Yeah, people like using that for transcribing podcasts, among other things. There's all kinds of things you can do with it. Yeah. It's interesting too that the process you were describing, Becca, about how to kind of look at the pluses of an idea while you're still trying to kind of acclimatize yourself to it, and then do so in a way that's non-judgmental and so forth. The way you were describing it is very much like a word that we use in the Thai boot camp. It's like you're learning to release. You're releasing the anxiety. You're releasing all the stress. You're releasing all the negative thoughts. You're release. You're just expressing it differently. It's the same thing, but you're expressing it differently.
Yeah. Well, and you can't really release it if you're really trying to avoid, like, if you're trying to avoid acknowledging that you have it in the first place, it's really hard to then let it go.
Yeah. Which is what the big advantage and the value of the writing part, because now you're actually sitting down to express it, to get it out and put it on paper or on screen or whatever form of writing that you do. Yep. Because that process there's something magical about that process. I'm not sure exactly what it is. I guess from a LOA spiritual point of view, I'd say that it's connecting to source, connecting to your inner being. But whatever it is, it works.
I think it's also committing. Like you're actually committing to yourself, to doing it and to actually like focusing and not, my phone is actually a little too far for me to reach. I wanted to like pick it up because it's like how often the second we have a free moment that we pick up our phone and fill that moment instead of letting ourselves sit and think, fill it with the phone. I think that especially now, it's just so easy to fill up all of our time if we wanted to, that the writing gives us something physical. I know, I don't know whether this is true, but I do remember when years ago, someone was trying to stop smoking and they started playing with a pen, and someone had told them to do that because they were so used to just always having something in their hand. And I think it's the same thing. If we're so used to having something physically in our hand all the time, then having a pen in our hand and writing actually can help focus.
Okay. Yeah, that makes some sense. I can see how that would work. Isn't it also the idea that as we take the time out, as we get into that I'm in the now mode, that mindfulness mode, as it's often called these days, it's almost like we're giving ourselves a time out.
Right.
It's almost like we're saying, you deserve a break right now. Like the old Burger King, you deserve a break today. Well, take it right now. You don't have to wait for later on today, and do it right now. And just take that break.
And I deserve to reconnect with myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And in the process, guess what? We start to actually believe in our own ideas. We start to believe in our own ability to accomplish. We start to believe in our own manifestations. We start to believe in all of it just because we've taken the time to focus on us.
Exactly.
Pretty powerful stuff. So I'm going to throw your own exercise at you, right?
Okay.
Because you talk about how you want to help people figure out what they're going to do over the next 3 or 5 years. Where's Becca going to be in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I'm taking it in a little bit smaller of a chunk. I am really hoping this next book does not take me 3 to 5 years to finish.
Okay, well, that's good. That's a good start. Yeah, I like that.
It took me about 4 years to actually publish the Clarity Journal. So I am really hoping, if it's out in 3 to 5 years, great. I'll still have it out, but I'm hoping it'll take me less than a year. My next book that I'm working on is called Mindful Procrastination. And it's a lot of...
I like that one.
I love it. That's great.
And I just love the idea of really both like being mindful and being self-compassionate. Like, it's okay if you're procrastinating right now. It's okay if you are finding yourself a little bit stuck. The more that you can handle that internally with the compassion and with the non-judgment, the much better off you'll be.
Yeah, basically you're going after something that's probably the number one thing that people engage in that undermines themselves, and that's beating themselves up.
Right.
In this case, over procrastination. But we're really good at beating ourselves up. We can beat ourselves up.
I can find other things. Don't worry.
Yeah, I got a whole list here. Let's go for it. But procrastination is certainly near the top of that list. And beating yourself up about that has a really interesting effect. It makes you procrastinate more.
Right. I was going to say it's like a negative self-feeding loop.
Exactly. Yeah.
And once you're in it, it's just so hard to get out of it. And that's when
It's
we take our walk or take our drive or try to journal a little bit or something like that.
Yeah. It's really hard to get ourselves out of it. And it's also like the very thing that society keeps telling us all we need to do is use willpower. Just do it. Like, I mean, we have that almost on a loop here. And it's the very thing that if you haven't given yourself the space, it's going to be really hard and you're going to just keep depleting yourself and you're going to keep talking bad about yourself. Because if you can't just willpower through it, then that gives you yet another thing to be like, oh, well, why can't I do this?
So let's try to come at it from the other direction. We've been talking about here's all the reasons why we can't do it. What can we do? How can we get to the point where we're okay with it and we're moving on and we're moving forward?
I think that it naturally comes. Like the more you're aware of something, the easier it is to move through it. When I say that, I always like to add a caveat that if you've experienced true trauma, if you're in the throes of PTSD, if you're like, if there's a diagnosable problem right now that you're having, you probably would be better off just getting help for that to begin with, because you're just going to run up against it in so many annoying, weird ways that that it becomes exhausting trying to be mindful about it all. So if you're really struggling, then I highly recommend actually just going to therapy and really getting to the bottom of some of the root stuff that you're dealing with. But for the rest of us, for people who are just like post-pandemic exhausted as opposed to like post-pandemic, like really anxious and depressed, like just start noticing yourself. And like my favorite thing to start with is to start naming the doubts. Start naming your patterns for where you're talking bad about yourself. Maybe make them a little silly. Name it like Hilga or
oh, my Hilga is coming back again. Okay.
Right. Or my, like, I don't know. I'm trying to think of, like there's Karen.
Yeah.
I got my inner Karen.
David Strickles suggests the same thing too, that we name our self-limiting, that
what did he call his? Claude? Was that what it was?
Claude. He has his Claude voice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. I feel like I have an inner Karen sometimes. And it's just like, you know what? Like it's not helping and you're not going to be able like to move through and attract the things you want to attract if you're still stuck in struggling with them, like being in a death match with your inner critic.
Right.
That death match will win too if you stay with it. Yeah.
The self-limiting beliefs.
Yeah, but they're there. They got started. We got started on learning those self-limiting beliefs really young.
Right.
It takes a while to be able to treat them with humor. And I think that the more you can treat them with humor, the quicker they go away.
I agree too.
Yeah, that's a big part of this practice that we're involved in. This Thai practice is finding those, we call them transgressors, finding those past transgressors. And the terminology we use is detune the transgressors so they aren't creating that vibration anymore.
Right.
Yeah. And it is an amazing process because when you do successfully detune them, it's almost like they just kind of disappear. Like, where did that one go? That used to be really haunting me and now it's not there anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very powerful thing when that happens. So, okay. I love the way you kind of, avoided my question.
I'm trying to remember what the question was.
The question was, what's 3 to 5 years?
What's the future
5 years?
like?
I don't know. I would, because the thing I'm so focused on right now is writing and finishing up this book. That
Which
I'm
is
like,
good.
I am not actually sure of my 5-year plan. I guess probably to write another couple books.
Oh, okay.
But I don't, but I think that my biggest goal is to help people really be more comfortable with themselves. Like be able to sit in this messiness and see it as just human messiness as opposed to something that they should feel bad about or something that they should beat themselves up about, or so, because I think that sometimes, at the very beginning, you asked me who I work with.
Mm-hmm.
And I work with people on a whole, like, huge range of ages.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I work with people that are in their 20s. I work with people that are in their 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that's the hardest is when I get a client who's in their 60s and we're working purely on career stuff, and they just have put themselves last. Like, they, for various reasons, family or whatnot, they really just, there was always going to be another time at which it would be easier to do what they kept thinking they were going to do. And then they get into their late 50s, early 60s, and then they feel like they're out of time. And it's like, well, you're not out of time, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
But also, if you're always putting everyone else first and making, and I don't want to say making excuses, but like always allowing the circumstances to dictate what you are doing, then you're taking control of your life. And it really does end up being sad for your future self, because eventually you're going to have to do it. And it actually, even if you have kids, even if things are chaotic right now, it is actually harder to do it when you're older, because then you feel like you don't have enough time. And so my goal is to help people, if they didn't start it yesterday, to go ahead and start it today.
Okay. So we have a good idea of what you're going to be doing 3 to 5 years from now. Of course, the other side of it is, I don't remember who said this originally. I know this is another Taya thing, but we're not human doings, we're human beings. So where do you want to be 5 years from now?
Well, I'm living in Seattle right now, and I love Seattle, but it just started raining. So at this very moment, in 5 years, I'd like to be on the beach in Bali.
Okay.
I love that question, and it's making me really, the good questions make you stop and huh.
They do. They make you reevaluate and kind of take a gut check. Okay, what's really going on with me right now?
In 5 years, I'll have a 17-year-old and a 12-year-old.
Ah.
And what does that look like?
Changes up to life.
It does change. I feel like I actually don't know that I could imagine that quite yet. It's starting to become more and more clear, but I think what I really want to make sure of for myself is that I set myself up well enough that these ebbs and flows don't knock me off too far, because I really, and I see this a lot with a lot of people, we've talked about the pandemic, and a lot of people ended up feeling like they had to start over. Not necessarily with their career, but just in so many different ways. I know a lot of people who have had very serious marital problems because, you went from seeing your husband on weekends and maybe 2 hours a night to being
all day long,
with the kids all day long.
Yes.
And I think that's, isn't that the point of all of this, is to just set yourself up so that you can both be your best self, but also get back to your best self as quickly as possible when life gets a little bit in the way.
Well, plus also the pandemic it's been an opportunity and a challenge at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Right. There have been definite winners and losers.
Oh yeah. I mean, look at the things that we've been able to win out of it.
Right.
And there's lots of them. There is the challenge of being with somebody that frequently when you're used to being with them less frequently, but there's also the joy of it, depending on how you just decide to go about doing it. You're not at work. You're not in the office anymore, but you're working from home, and all of a sudden people are discovering the joys of working from home.
Right.
And a lot of them are in rebellion. Like, I'm not going back to the office anymore. I'll get a new job if I have to.
I get clients over and over again. Okay, so how do I find a job that I know I'll never have to go back into the office again?
So that's a lot of clarity for a lot of people. And especially for those in positions where they never really thought that they had options. And now I'm seeing, that the fear of change is abating in a lot of people. And so the pandemic for me, which is hilarious. The other day, my husband said, wasn't that pandemic so cool? We got to spend all this time together. I'm like, you are nuts. I mean, but I really see like there were so many positives, you know, in it. And of course, if somebody's laid off, they're not going to see that. But for some people, even those who were laid off, it's like, hey, that was an excuse to go on and do something else. And so
a lot of people have said that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it's also been like a really interesting job market, you know, people who weren't happy in their jobs now have options they didn't have before. And I think that we're just in a cycle of more chaos than I think we've had in this generation in a long time. Mm-hmm. And that chaos actually in a lot of ways has been extraordinarily positive.
I think so.
I'm with you.
And there's also been like negative chaos as well. And I think that it is kind of what you make of it. I mean, it is at a very real level. It is like where your energy is moving forward, I think is going to really help define where you're going.
And it's where your attention is going to be.
Right.
If you're going to give your attention to the negative side of things, you're going to get more of that. If you're going to give your attention to the positive side of things, you're going to get more of that. So where are you going to put your attention, really?
Yeah.
Right.
It's nice to have those kinds of choices. And you're right, it has been chaotic. But chaos is sometimes a good thing. We tend to associate chaos as being something negative, but it's actually it's kind of like the whole thing got, shaken up. Okay, let's see what the new rules of the game are now.
Yeah.
I can't wait. No, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry. No, I just can't wait to see what the things, how our commerce changes or how our society changes.
Oh,
I mean, even the simplest thing like, going to a store and checking out and paying for something. And then they give you an option of leaving a tip. It's like, you would never think of leaving, before it's like leaving a tip and it's like, wow, okay, that's a different way of seeing it. Mm-hmm. But I think the pandemic is causing a lot of change, and I think we should be thankful of the change, like we needed it.
And we're seeing a lot of it. It's happening already. I mean, it gets, if you look at it through the lens of the news, it always is a negative, but I don't look at it through their lens. I look at it through other lenses. And so, for instance, we have like this job market that's completely shaken up. People who used to do like restaurant work, they aren't choosing to do restaurant. They're saying, I'm tired of getting paid like that. I want to get paid to do something well. And all of a sudden the restaurants are having to adjust. Oh my God, we don't have enough laborers. Well, that's probably a good thing because now they're shaking up the restaurant industry to be something that, there's going to be a shakeout. There's going to be some that go under, but there are others that are going to get stronger. Others that are going to have actually more successful operations. And there probably is going to be an overall increase in the cost of going to a restaurant. But you know what? That's probably a good thing because that just basically means that the whole industry is going to make itself a better industry. And it's just restaurants. There are a whole bunch of industries that have similar kinds of stories going on. Similar when I'm just dealing with this one right now. We have a car that was in the shop. Thankfully, it turned out there was nothing wrong with it. So that was a good piece of news. But we were out car shopping. And anybody who knows about what's going on in the car market, in the new car market, because of the pandemic, computer chips weren't being made in the same quantities anymore. So there weren't enough chips to make the cars. So the new car dealers are taking used cars and putting them out on the lot instead. And that means there's fewer inventory for the used car dealers. And all of a sudden the rental cars, they actually sold off all the cars when the pandemic hit. Now all of a sudden they have to start building up their fleets again. So now there's this shortage of cars all over the place. The price has gone up. Oh my God, chaos, crazy, all this terrible stuff going on. And yet it's going to lead to some amazing stuff. It's going to lead to amazing differences. The real estate market, there's another one. All terrible things. Oh my God, the market's out of control. You can't afford a house anymore. But it's going to lead to other stuff. All this stuff is leading to other stuff.
Right. That's when we appreciate our transgressors. We appreciate these things that shake us up or change our world or have us question things in a different way, because it's just going to lead us to the next thing, which is going to lead us to the next thing, which is going to lead us to the next thing. And it's never ending. So instead of demonizing these things, we really need to sort of embrace them and see them for what they are.
Becca, I'm going to ask you, Becca, a question, because this is a question that I've always gotten the same answer. I'm curious to know if you're going to keep the answer flow, the train going. I think you're probably going to say yes on this one. But one of the things that I have noticed, particularly with therapists and life coaches and such who have been on the program, is they all have a story that they told about some traumatic event that happened in their lives that was life-changing. And that life-changing traumatic event, it's something they would never want to go through again, but it's the one thing that they look back on and say, boy, did I get the most out of that compared to anything else that ever happened in my life. That taught me so much, or that helped me to become stronger, or that helped me to launch into something new. I'm totally honest. I mean, it's some kind of a major down event that turned into a springboard for major up events. And I'm curious to know if that's also been true for you.
I'm trying to think about that, because I have definitely had trauma in my life. I feel like the springboard in my life has been more about connection than it's been about trauma.
Okay.
And so I would say that every time I've had a springboard, it's because I've connected with someone, or someone's said something that shifted how I was thinking. And like a good example of this is, I feel like people sometimes will ask me, like, why did you become a career coach? And I'll tell them the story about how I figured out I was going to be a career coach. But I feel like that story actually starts earlier. I have a very, very vivid memory of my grandfather picking me up from a friend's house one summer. And he picked me up in his beat up car. He was near retirement age, but he wasn't retired. And my grandfather had been a bricklayer, and then I'm not actually sure what he did. I know he still was in the bricklayers union, but like manager of some sort. And I remember him just going on and on about how much he hated his job. And I remember asking him why he stayed in it if he hated it. And the standard answer from someone born in the 40s, or I guess 30s, was, what do you mean? Like, I stay in it because of my job.
Yes.
You know,
Career for life.
Exactly.
That's what I do.
And that's what I do. And I feel like so many of the pivotal moments of my life are more like that. And so observing other people's trauma, or observing like other people, observing things in other people's lives that I didn't like, and not like a judgment about them exactly, but like defining for me and myself what I wanted. And when we were talking about the pandemic and the creative chaos, like one of the things that I think is going to be so good going forward is, I feel like the US has become so fixated on productivity, so fixated on wringing out every last drop from every employee. And that's no longer acceptable. Like, people are no longer going to accept that. People are putting their own happiness above the man or whatever you want to call it. And I think that's so positive, because because before the pandemic, it really was a big deal trying to help people find jobs where they wouldn't be taken advantage of, where they would actually get to leave work at 5:30, you know, and not have to work all night. Like, I don't think we're there yet in every industry, certainly, but we've all of a sudden started feeling like we can have boundaries with our work, and our happiness does have value. And I think that's really wonderful, and hopefully it continues. I mean, I can only knock on wood or whatever that we just continue down that path. And because there is no point to making a lot of money if you're working 60 hours a week and you aren't actually getting to enjoy life.
That's exactly true. Yeah. And I think it is, you're right. We are in a transition period. I don't think it's a transition that's going to stop, at least not stop in the sense of reverting back to where it was. I don't see that. I don't see any way that could happen.
Right.
We've crossed the Rubicon. We have actually gone past the point of no return with that, I believe. And that's a good thing. I agree with you. I think that's an excellent thing. I love the fact that what we're really describing there is people, even without coaching, even without any kind of mindfulness or consciousness about what's going on or whatever, they're finding their way back to enjoying life.
Right.
They're just doing it on their own.
Or recognizing that they deserve the space to do their hobbies. They deserve that. Yeah. Even if they haven't figured out how to enjoy life yet, they know they need to.
The impetus is there.
Right.
The impetus is definitely, and certainly we can point to the pandemic and to being in lockdown and all that kind of stuff. That's where that kind of idea was born. It was born, and right now I am feeling tied down to this little space that I'm in, and I'm being forced in this, and I don't like that, and I want something to change, and something changed.
You know, getting back, Becca, to what you were saying about learning from others or seeing what others are going through, and there's a quote, I think it's Sam Levinson, I'm not sure, but it's like, I have to learn from the mistake of others because I can't live long enough to make all the mistakes on my own. Something like something like that. Because it's so true. It's like you see, well, I don't want to be like that. Somebody acts a certain way. Well, I don't want to be like that. And that's how we learn, right? I wouldn't respond like that, or, oh, I like the way they said that. And I could see as a child, you know, my grandfather, and the same, you know, how he was very prejudiced. Well, I don't want to be like that. And so we just sort of define our preferences as we go along. And I see that's what you were doing with like was it your father, your grandfather?
Yeah, my grandfather. You can also do it on the flip side. My favorite question in the Clarity Journal is, who do you envy and what does it tell you about yourself?
Interesting.
And I think so often we think of envy as a negative emotion, but it's actually a positive emotion as long as you don't go too far down the dark rabbit hole. Like if you actually just notice who it is you admire, who it is that you would like to emulate, and you're able to take the lessons of that, because we don't envy everyone. If you're a writer, you don't envy every single writer. You envy a very specific writer, or maybe two, and it's because they have an interesting lifestyle and like you like what they're writing. There's a style you like. It's not just because they have a lot of money, or if it's because they have a lot of money, it's because they have like a ton of money. Like, I mean, I'm not saying that everyone, like sometimes people's internal motivator really is that they want to play the game of getting the most wealth. Well, then they're not envious of the people that got like, you know, $1 million. They're envious of the people that, you know, they're envious of like J.K. Rowling's, who she's made like $1 billion.
She's a billionaire, yeah.
Right. So I think that like who we envy really does tell us a lot about like what our subconscious wants. And if we allow ourselves to learn from that, and also see them as instead of someone to like envy in a negative sense, but more take it and make it into a positive thing. This is a roadmap. This person did it before me. I don't have to do exactly what they did, but I can take these lessons and see what they did and see how I can make it my own.
This has been very cool. As usual, the hour flies by and we don't have nearly enough time to ask all the questions we'd like to ask, but we appreciate the fact that we've been able to ask the questions we did get in there. And before we go, we want you to take a moment to let people know, particularly those who might be interested in reaching out and learning more. How do they find Becca Ribbing?
Yes, please.
Yeah. BeccaRibbing.com is my website. So that's BECCA Ribbing, RIBBING. And you can find the Clarity Journal on Amazon.
Very good. All right.
I'm going to read that.
Wow, I hope you liked it.
Thank you.
You have a fan already. It hasn't even been published yet. The podcast listeners haven't even heard it yet. So.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Really this has been really fun.
Thank you for being on the show. Thank you for reaching out. Yes.
Yeah.
It has been fun. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for picking a date and joining us and sharing your unique perspective. It's been really, really interesting to hear. So we wish you the best of luck. And we certainly are going to be interested to find out what you end up, actually focusing on 5 years from now in Bali.
I will definitely come back. Like, this is what I've done for the last 5 years.
All right. So cool stuff. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you especially to our podcast listeners everywhere. And we will see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.